In the intricate landscape of global geopolitics, few stories capture the attention of policymakers and the public alike, as much as the nuanced dance of diplomacy between the United States and Iran. Recently, President Trump announced his expectation of a swift response from Iran regarding ongoing food aid negotiations. This development marks a potential turning point in U.S. Iran relations amid a backdrop of heightened tensions in the Middle East. The president's statement, delivered during a high profile address, outlined his anticipation for constructive engagement from Tehran on humanitarian assistance, suggesting an opening for dialogue amid worsening famine conditions in parts of the region, exacerbated by sanctions and conflict. This announcement is particularly significant as it represents one of the first public acknowledgments from the White House of potential progress in a diplomatic channel that has long been frozen. Since the renewal of maximum pressure sanctions earlier in the year, U.S. Iran relations have been marked by a series of stalemates. Historically, Iranian leadership has been resistant to such overtures, often viewing them as attempts to undermine its sovereignty. However, recent internal economic pressures, including rampant hyperinflation and severe supply chain disruptions, may be compelling a pragmatic shift in Tehran's stance. President Trump's direct involvement in these negotiations signals a strategic pivot that could blend humanitarian aid with leverage for broader discussions on Iran's nuclear ambitions and regional activities. Contextually, this development emerges against an intensified backdrop of U.S. military posturing in the Persian Gulf. The deployment of additional carrier strike groups, coupled with Iran's recent ballistic missile tests, has rattled global markets and escalated tensions. The proposal for food aid is rooted in a United Nations report highlighting acute malnutrition in Iranian border provinces, a situation partly attributed to export restrictions on agricultural goods. Previous U.S. administrations have attempted similar initiatives, but they have often faltered due to verification disputes and resistance from hardliners within Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. However, the current approach appears to emphasize speed and unilateral action, bypassing multilateral frameworks to pressure Iran for quick compliance. The implications of this move are multifaceted. On the positive side, a successful agreement on food aid could avert a humanitarian crisis, stabilize the oil prices that have surged owing to fears of supply disruptions, and potentially open doors to broader de-escalation in the region. This could reduce the risk of direct confrontation, a scenario that looms large given the current military dynamics. Economically, easing inflationary pressures on global commodities could also benefit U.S. consumers, who are currently facing domestic grocery price hikes. However, there are notable risks associated with this strategy. Some critics argue that if Iran perceives this initiative as a sign of weakness, it could embolden further aggressive actions, such as expanding support for proxy militias in Yemen or Syria. Domestically, this move enhances President Trump's image as a decisive deal-maker, especially as midterm election cycles approach. Nevertheless, it also invites criticism from hawks in Congress who advocate for stricter enforcement of sanctions. Furthermore, this development underscores shifting global alliances, with China and Russia voicing support for Iran's position, which could complicate U.S. efforts. Intelligence assessments raise concerns that Tehran might leverage any aid influx to bolster its military capabilities, necessitating stringent monitoring mechanisms to ensure humanitarian efforts are not diverted. For international observers, the timeline President Trump outlined, anticipating a response within days, could catalyze emergency UN Security Council sessions, influencing a myriad of global issues from refugee flows to energy markets. In the broader geopolitical landscape, this episode highlights the intricate balance between compassion and coercion that defines modern statecraft. A favorable response from Iran could herald a fragile thaw in relations, fostering opportunities for economic reintegration and counterbalancing adversarial influences across the region. Conversely, rejection or delays could precipitate an escalation in sanctions or preemptive actions, sending ripples through global security architectures. As these developments unfold, the world watches closely, recognizing this as a litmus test for whether humanitarian imperatives can indeed pierce the veil of entrenched rivalries. The potential for progress depends on a delicate blend of diplomatic acumen, strategic patience, and the willingness of both parties to engage in meaningful dialogue. The stakes are undeniably high, as the outcomes of these negotiations could shape the contours of international relations in the Middle East for years to come.